Indiana basketball avoids a disaster in the season opener.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in. It is the Locked On Hoosiers podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Goins. I appreciate you making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen each and every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is your team every day. Indiana basketball avoids a disaster in the season opener against Florida Gulf Coast. We're going to break it all down. Instant reactions live. The game just ended. And we're going to talk about all of what happened in the season opener for Indiana basketball against Florida Gulf Coast. Be sure you like and subscribe the video on YouTube. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter as well at Locked On Hoosiers. We're tweeting during the game. We want you to interact on there, asking for your input every game, all week long and all season long. Indiana defeats Florida Gulf Coast in the season opener 69-63. And oh my gosh, they had to fight for this win. I mean, wow. We were all excited about the season opener and we figured it wouldn't be overly pretty, but I don't know if we expected this and a 6-point win in your season opener. Before we get into content, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Indiana basketball defeats Florida Gulf Coast 69-63. I've got a bunch of notes. I've got a bunch of storylines. I've got a bunch of takeaways from this game, and that's what we're going to do here on the show tonight. We're going to give you instant reactions, player performances, and final takeaways from the season opener for Indiana. Let me start by saying this. A win is a win, okay? A win is a win. And I told you coming into this game that a win is okay, right? A win is a good thing, and don't overreact to a bad or mediocre performance. Well, I'm going to tell you the same thing. Even after what we just saw, I'm going to tell you the same thing. But it's okay to be like, what in the world just happened, Indiana, right? What in the world was that? It's okay to be that way. Let's run through some of the quick stats that I want to get through really, really quickly here. When looking at some of the team stats for Indiana versus Florida Gulf Coast in this basketball game, Indiana shot 51% from the field. I know it's kind of crazy, but they did shoot 51%. To Florida Gulf Coast, just 38%. Here's the difference, though. Here's the game changer right here. And the fact that Indiana won a basketball game, or any team won a basketball game with this stat line, really does blow my mind. Indiana shot 31% from three. Florida Gulf Coast shot 38% from three. Okay, you look at that percentage, not bad. Indiana shot just 4 of 13 from three. They made 4 threes all night. That's 12. That's simple math. Florida Gulf Coast hit 13 threes. They shot 34 of them. 34 threes attempted in a basketball game. That was over half their shots. And they made 13 of them. That is a massive outscoring advantage for Florida Gulf Coast. On the road, by the way, in Assembly Hall. We're going to get to that in just a minute. Free throw percentage, it wasn't good either. The free throw differential, this is another big factor. Indiana, 19 of 30. I don't like the 11 missed free throws, but you at least attempted 30 of them. I love that number. I love that number. Here's the problem for Florida Gulf Coast. 2 of 6. 2 of 6 from the free throw line. A team on the road that, let's be honest, they had a chance to win this game at the end. And you only get to the free throw line 6 total times, or 6 total attempts 3 times, right? That's not going to get it done on the road. But we knew going in, this is a Florida Gulf Coast team that shoots the three. It's what they did last year, and it's what they're doing this year. They don't shoot a lot of free throws because they don't get to the basket very often. When in doubt, shoot it out. It's the Florida Gulf Coast method, and it almost worked in Assembly Hall in Bloomington. Unbelievable, man, unbelievable. Turnovers weren't great. They weren't terrible. Indiana had 11. In Florida Gulf Coast had 13. There were some timely turnovers, though, right? Very, very timely turnovers. Indiana does win, though, 69-63. Here's some of the notes and some of the takeaways I had from the first half and into the second half. And we'll talk more player performances and individual players and their efforts coming up in just a little bit. But you had some big defensive plays from Kel'el Ware early on. The two big volleyball blocks were sweet. Those were awesome, right? And I think that's something he can do all season long down low. Florida Gulf Coast, give them all the credit in the world. They were making some really tough shots in this basketball game. They made a bunch of threes. We know that. But they, even early in this game, they were making some really tough shots, tough floaters, tough threes. And there were some where Indiana was just left scratching their head, tip your hat and run down the floor and move on. But Indiana offensively, man, what in the world? The half-court offense was non-existent for most of this game until late in the second half with the big run, which we'll get to. But the half-court offense was non-existent. Indiana had a 7-minute stretch in the first half where they didn't score. They went scoreless. And Florida Gulf Coast had 5 of their 13 threes in that first half. Those two things don't pair together, folks. They don't pair together very well, right? Free throw shooting was bad in the first half. You made up for it in the second half, thankfully. Thank God if you're Indiana. But overall, the first half wasn't pretty. You're up by just 2 at 28-26 at the break. And it's a little stressful. I'm not going to lie. And to start the second half, it didn't get a whole lot better, especially on the defensive side of the basketball, on the defensive side of the floor for Indiana. Shooters wide open. And I say the word wide with about 20 to 25 eyes. Wide open. I'm terrible at basketball. And even I would have made a couple of threes at times in these defensive possessions, and Indiana was just getting stuck. They were just getting stuck and lost in the motion, in the movement, and in the cluster of some of the offense that Florida Gulf Coast runs. Indiana was just leaving shooters wide open, and Florida Gulf Coast was making those shots. We'll talk more about takeaways from this Indiana opening season win over Florida Gulf Coast, 69-63, plus some big-time performances for some of these Indiana players. All that coming up in just a minute here on Locked On Hoosiers. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is awesome. I have really gotten into it since I've started here at Locked On. And it's just so unique. You go on, you can choose from hockey, from the NFL. They even have gaming on Prize Picks now. You can bet on literally professional video games. How crazy is that? You choose your selections. You can wager however little or however much. You can do, if they all hit, you get a big payout. You can choose 2 or 3 of them out of the mini to win, and you get a smaller but maybe a safer bet as well. It's awesome. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Best example I could give is kickers, right? Monday Night Football. You pick the 2 kickers to have over or under a half a field goal made in the first quarter. I may have won a little friendly wager, a little bet, if you will, on that in the Monday Night Football game. You can do that with goals for in hockey, points in hockey. You can do it for goals in soccer. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do. It really, really is a unique daily fantasy sports app where it's just so much fun. It's easy to win. It's easy to play. You can get on in and out in 2 minutes. You really do have to try it out. And I talk about this every time. The reboot policy, where your entries stay safe in play, even if one of your players gets injured for football and basketball games. If you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second half, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy with PrizePicks. Indiana defeating Florida Gulf Coast 69-63 in the season opener. And looking into the second half of this game, I know we alluded to it just a little bit ago, but the second half, Indiana defenders were just all over the place. Lack of communication, both guys moving with the ball, right? Communication on switching and non-switching wasn't really there. And Florida Gulf Coast shooters, I mean, just wide open, and it was like shooting into the ocean at times for these guys. And again, they were making them 13 of 34 from downtown, shooting almost 40% on the road. That's incredible. That is incredible for a Florida Gulf Coast team. And Indiana finally started to figure it out a little bit. But even down the stretch in the last couple of minutes, Florida Gulf Coast hit some threes to keep themselves in the game, right? But that's what that team does. So Indiana has to find a way to fix that and figure that out. And I think communication and chemistry will really fix those things for Indiana basketball. Half-court offense, again, started out brutal. I mean, just started out brutal. No transition points. About halfway through that second half, the 10-minute mark was what I thought was the difference maker, was the changing moment of the game, where I literally typed in my notes. I said, transition points, no transition buckets. I wanted to talk about it. And then all of a sudden, Indiana forced a turnover and Xavier Johnson in transition with a layup. And that is what started a 14-0 run, led to, I believe, a 16-2 run. And that's where Indiana really woke up in the second half. Assembly Hall, which had been dead silent all night. They had been quiet all night long. They finally got up, had something to cheer for, and got excited. And I thought this is where Indiana was going to run away, right? This is where Indiana was going to pull away from a lesser opponent. They were going to start winning by 15, 16, maybe 20 points, and everything was going to be okay. Indiana had some transition layups, had some hustle plays by Gabe Cupps, which I am overly impressed with him. Oh my goodness. Gabe Cupps is going to be a difference maker for this team. And I thought this is where it was all going to be okay. But then things just kept happening. Offensive rebounds for Florida Gulf Coast led to more points, led to three-pointers, kept them hanging around, right? The Indiana offense in the half court still could not make baskets. After that big run, it just sort of slowed down and stopped yet again. There were great hustle plays, right? Gabe Cupps and Trey Galloway were all over the floor, making good plays. Galloway had the 360 spin cycle move in the lane. That was fantastic. But Indiana couldn't put him away. Couldn't put Florida Gulf Coast away. And a team that shoots threes like that is tough to do. It is. It's tough to do. But Indiana just couldn't put them away. And Florida Gulf Coast hung around. And Indiana had to make free throws down the stretch late, which is crazy. But they did. And Indiana wins 69-63. A couple of players that really stood out to me in this game. You had your starters, right? You had the freshman Mackenzie Mbako, whose shooting stroke from outside is pretty impressive. Notice he didn't play a whole lot late, right? Take notice of that. He's young. It'll be fine. I'm not worried about it. But I think his shooting stroke is really good. I think he's going to be a really good player. But Mackenzie Mbako, just 4 points, had a foul, just 2 for 6 shooting. To kind of run through some of the stats here quickly for Indiana, Malik Renew, he's going to be a player, man. He's going to be a player, and I think he really asserted himself in game one. And without a guy like Malik Renew, Indiana doesn't win a game like this. How about this stat? 4 of your 5 starters, Malik Renew, Kel'el Ware, Galloway, and Johnson, all in double digits. Is that sustainable throughout the year? No, especially when you only get 7 points off your bench. That is not sustainable in college basketball in 2023. It's just not. But for the time being, we'll take it. Renew with 15 points on 6 of 10 shooting and 3 of 6 from the free throw line. Did have 2 turnovers and had 3 fouls, but didn't really come into play. Kel'el Ware in his first game wearing Indiana jerseys. 2 for 5 from the floor. Nothing crazy. Had a 3 that looked really good. I don't know if I'm a fan of him shooting threes yet, but if he can shoot 1 of 3 as a big guy, that's all you got to do. 33% is perfect for a big man to shoot threes because it's just good enough to be a threat where teams have to respect it. And if he goes out behind the arc, they have to come out and guard him. And then that opens up the inside of the floor. So 1 of 3 for Kel'el Ware from deep. I'm cool with that. Here's the biggest number of the night. Best stat of the night from all Indiana players. Kel'el Ware at the charity stripe, 8 of 12. That's huge. That is huge. If that's a guard, I want to see that be 10 of 12. But for one of your big guys who's going to be fouled a lot, who's going to be at the charity stripe, 8 of 12 is perfect for me, including some big ones down the stretch as well. Had 12 total rebounds. 9 of those were defensive, 3 offensive. 12 total rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, 3 blocks, and 13 points for your starting center, Kel'el Ware. How about a pretty close to perfect performance in game one in his first ever game playing for Indiana? I'll take that all day. I'll take that every single game for Indiana. I really, really will. Galloway, 7 of 9 from the floor. That is effective shooting from him. Really, really like what I see from him. He had 16 points to lead all scorers for Indiana. Do I expect to see that game in and game out? No, I don't. I think he's going to be a huge role player, a guy that you can lean on in time of need, right? You're going to hear him singing "Lean on Me," right? When times are tough, like they were in game one, and he came to play. And then Xavier Johnson, 5 of 9 from the floor, 3 of 6 from the free throw line. I'd like to see that be a little bit better. But a guard getting 4 rebounds, love it. Assist numbers have to be better. Assist numbers have to be better, especially since he had 2 turnovers. That's opposite of what you're looking for in that ratio. But your starters played pretty well outside of Mackenzie Mbako, who didn't play bad. He just didn't have a whole lot of minutes, right? Didn't have a whole lot of minutes, didn't have a ton of playing time down the stretch. And your bench, I don't want to say they were non-existent because Gabe Cupps was a huge reason that Indiana came back and won this ball game. But they're going to have to score some more. And shout out to Gabe Cupps. Just 5 points. But he was the spark for Indiana late. He was the energy guy late for Indiana that woke up Assembly Hall, that woke up the bench for the Hoosiers and got this team through, and they're now 1-0. That has to be said. That has to got to give credit to Gabe Cupps, who I think is going to end up being a fan favorite. I think he is already as a young freshman. Had a couple of, he had 1 make. It was behind the arc, had a couple free throws as well. Shout out Gabe Cupps and his 5 points coming off the bench. But coming up on Locked On Hoosiers, final takeaways, expectations moving forward. Indiana's 1-0. We'll talk about why that's a good thing and what Indiana needs to do moving forward with the game coming up in just a couple of days here to start the 2023 season. But before we do that, want to remind you that college football season is getting near the end. And as it does, every single week, Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live each Friday. Locked On will go live at 11 a.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, conference rivalry games, and go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it. And also wanting to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the go-to app that I use when it comes to sports betting on Saturdays, Sundays, middle of the week for college basketball. It is the place to go. And with this NFL season, FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnCollege and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So where do we go from here if we're Indiana basketball, right? You win in your season opener 69-63 at Assembly Hall. You get to honor Bob Knight, right? First game, first regular season game after his passing. And you win the basketball game by 6. Was it the prettiest of wins? Absolutely not. Was it something that Indiana should be proud of? Yes, because you got to win. And it's early season basketball. Hey, ask Michigan State if they'd like to have a win right now. I bet they'd take it. I bet they'd take a win over Florida Gulf Coast right now. Don't you think? The #4 team in the country that just lost to James Madison? Yeah, I bet they would be just fine with a 6-point win over Florida Gulf Coast at home. And here's the thing. There's a reason that Florida Gulf Coast is picked to finish second in their conference in the Atlantic Sun. Preseason, they were picked to finish second in the conference. That's a good basketball team that Indiana just beat. And I think Indiana learned some things early on in this game. I really, really do. And even late in this game, I think you got to learn some things. There is a role, there is a world where Indiana is going to be able to play Malik Renew, Kel'el Ware, Galloway, Johnson, and I think Gabe Cupps is going to see some time. A guy like that can play with high energy, high effort, diving for loose balls, forcing turnovers. We're just going to have to see what Walker and CJ Gunn do coming off the bench. But I think those are some high flyers too. But overall, the bench is going to have to perform better. You can't expect your 5 starters, 4 of them to go double digits every night. It's just not realistic, especially against good teams like Kansas and UConn that you're going to see in non-con, and then you get into Big Ten play. Indiana has to find a half-court offense. You're going to have to find something. You can't stall out for 20 or 25 seconds. Tons of bad shots in the first half. Individual basketball is not going to work. So if Indiana can figure that out, figure out how not to lose shooters wide open, and just communicate. Again, I think that comes back to some chemistry, communication, practicing. I think that's what that's going to come down to, because Indiana didn't play bad defensively. You only gave up 63 points. More times than not, that's going to win you a ball game, right? And if you take away half, let's just say half of the 3-pointers, you had 13, so let's give Florida Gulf Coast 7. That's only 30 points. No, that math doesn't add up. That's 21 points. 21 points, right? Instead of what they had with 13 of 34. That's not anywhere bad. The score wouldn't have even been close at that point. You got to find shooters, get on shooters, stick with shooters. And I'll say this too. There was a point where Florida Gulf Coast, they went into a 2-3 zone early in the second half, and Indiana had no idea what to do. It was almost like they had never seen it. It was in the first half where they did that. Came out of a timeout. And Indiana offense just absolutely stalled. Had no idea what to do. You better believe that teams are going to see that, and teams are going to be like, we're going to play a 2-3 zone until they figure out how to beat it. So overall, was it a good game for Indiana? No. But was it a good win for Indiana? Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely was a good win for Indiana because, again, I think that Florida Gulf Coast team is going to beat some people this year. And Indiana found a way to win down the stretch. They let a team hang around, and we've already seen early in college basketball, if you do that, teams can beat you. But the Hoosiers found a way to win. You relied on your good guys. You relied on your big-name players, big-time players. Kel'el Ware had a double-double. That's something to shout out. Xavier Johnson, I think, played like a leading guard down the stretch. And once again, shout out Gabe Cupps for his energy off the bench, which I think revived this team. I really do. I think it just kind of woke this team up a little bit and said, okay, let's go play Indiana basketball. Let's get Assembly Hall into this game. Let's get the student section riled up a little bit. And at one point, it was a 14-0 run, and I think that's what happened with this team. Indiana wins 69-63. Do not stress out. Don't flip out yet, Hoosier fans. It's okay. It's okay. This game was closer than we thought it was going to be. This game was closer than I think a lot of people thought it was going to be. And that's okay. It's fine. Don't overreact. Don't flip out. There are things to fix. There are things to worry about. But I think there's some things to be confident in as well. Don't be confident in my math skills, but you should be confident in this Indiana team. You should. The talent is there. I hope you saw that. Half-court offense has to be fixed. Let's see some threes go in for this Indiana team. You got to hit a three here and there. Find three-point shooters on the defensive end, and let's force some turnovers and get out in transition. Because for an offense that stalls and can't do it in the half court, you got to find transition buckets, which means you got to force turnovers, which means you got to play some pressure. And we saw Indiana have some full court pressure in this game as well. But overall, it wasn't a bad first game. It really wasn't. It wasn't a bad first game. There's some things that have to be fixed. And if they don't, it could be a long season. But Indiana's 1-0. The Hoosiers defeat Florida Gulf Coast 69-63. And coming up in the next couple of games, you have Army and then Wright State. You have Army on Sunday and Wright State next Thursday. Perfect opportunities for the Hoosiers to work on some of these things before you go play in the Empire Classic and take on a top 10 team in UConn. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Hoosiers. Instant reaction for Indiana season opener and their season opening win, 69-63 over Florida Gulf Coast. I appreciate you making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen each and every day. I'm Jacob Goins. Follow me on Twitter at Goins2Jacob and follow the show on Twitter as well at Locked On Hoosiers. If you're on YouTube, follow, like, subscribe, turn on the notifications. If you're on any podcasting platform, please sure to follow and subscribe there as well. Make sure you have the notifications on for any time that we post an episode, which is every single day, including reactions after Indiana basketball games. So until next time, stay safe, Hoosier fans, and I'll talk to you later.